The letter's night was unusually quiet in the parking lot outside Sundar Pichai's office. The soft hum of distant traffic and the faint flicker of streetlights made the place feel almost unreal, like a dream you're not sure you are awake. And Sundar walked slowly toward his car, his mind still full of meetings and emails and problems waiting on his desk. It had been a long day, and all he wanted was to get home, close his eyes, and forget about everything for a few hours. But just as he unlocked the door and slipped into the driver's seat, he heard a weak voice behind him. "Sundar," the voice called. It was quiet but sharp, like a pin dropping into water. He froze, startled. Nobody ever called his name here, especially not after dark. When he turned, he saw her. She stood under the farthest lamp, a tiny figure wrapped in a faded blue shawl. She was old, impossibly old, her hands trembling as she held something out toward him. Her face was lined with years, but her eyes shone like they carried a secret too big for one heart to hold. "You need to read this tonight," she said, her voice thin but certain. "It cannot wait." He blinked, confused. I think you have the wrong person," he said, already reaching for the door to leave. But she shook her head slowly. "No, I never make mistakes." She took a step closer, and the light caught her face. She was even older than he thought, and yet there was a strange strength about her. She pressed the envelope into his hands before he could say another word. Sundar stood there for a moment, the envelope heavy in his palm, as though it held more than just paper inside. When he finally looked up, she was already walking away, her small figure swallowed by the shadows of the parking lot. He climbed into his car and stared at the envelope, his heart beating faster than it should. It was plain and yellowed, sealed. Carefully, his name written neatly across the front in delicate handwriting. There was no return address, no explanation, just his name. For a long minute he sat there, debating whether to open it now or just throw it in the glove compartment and forget about it. But something about the way she said "it cannot wait" kept echoing in his mind. So he tore it open, and the first line stopped his breath. "You don't know me, but you changed my life forever. And now it is time to repay you." Sundar felt his fingers tighten around the paper. He read the sentence again, slower this time, feeling a strange chill crawl up his spine. "Repay me? Who was she?" He turned the page and read on. "Many years ago, you made a choice you do not remember. You were just a boy then, but that choice set in motion everything that happened after. I have been waiting for the right time to tell you. Tonight is the time. And you must understand what was taken from you before it is too late." He paused, glancing up at the empty parking lot. The words on the page made no sense, and yet something about them felt true, like they fit into a part of his memory he had buried a long time ago. He took a deep breath and kept reading. "You may think your story is only yours, but it is not. Your story belongs to many people, and mine belongs to yours. I have watched you all these years, waiting for you to become the man you are now. But there are things you do not know. And if you do not know them soon, everything you built may fall. Everything you love may break. Everything you are may be lost." Sundar felt the words tightening in his chest. His hands shook slightly as he turned the page to see what came next. There was a photograph paper clipped to the last sheet, an old black and white photo of a woman holding a baby. The woman's face was partly turned away, but the baby's face? Sundar stared at it for a long time. It was him, his mind flooded with memories he could not quite reach. He was too young to remember being that small. But the woman, who was she? Why did she have this photo? Below the photograph, there was one final line written in the same delicate hand. "If you want to save everything you've built, meet me where it all began." He read the line over and over, feeling his pulse race faster with each reading. Where it all began. What did that even mean? Was she talking about his childhood home? His first school? His first job? He rubbed his temples, trying to think, when suddenly his phone rang. He jumped at the sound, the shrill tone cutting through the thick silence in the car. He glanced at the screen, expecting to see his wife's name or maybe a colleague. But instead it just said, "Unknown." He hesitated for a second before answering. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, just the faint sound of someone breathing. Then, just as he was about to hang up, he heard her voice, soft, tired, but unmistakable. "If you want to save everything, meet me where it all began," she repeated. This time over the phone, his heart sank. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "How did you get this number?" But she did not answer his question. Instead, she whispered, "Do not wait too long. They are already watching you." And then the line went dead. Sundar sat there for what felt like forever, staring at his reflection in the dark window. The envelope below lay open on the seat beside him. The photo staring up at him like a ghost from another life. He started the car, but he didn't drive home. He didn't even know where he was driving. The city lights blurred outside the windshield as his mind churned with questions that had no answers. Who was the woman? What did she know about him? What was she warning him about? And what did she mean by where it all began? He thought about calling anyone to talk about this, but who would believe him? Who could he even trust? He gripped the wheel tighter and pressed down on the gas. Somewhere in the distance, he could still hear her words echoing in his head. "They are already watching you." His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. No name, no number, just a single line glowing on the screen. "Don't trust anyone, even the people closest to you." He swallowed hard and glanced into the rearview mirror. For the first time in his life, he thought he saw a pair of headlights following just a little too closely. And as he turned down a quiet road, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life, everything he thought he knew, had just begun. To unravel asterisk where it all began, the sky was still dark when Sundar stepped off the plane in Chennai. The air was heavy with heat and the faint smell of burning wood, even though dawn had not yet broken. He stood for a moment on the quiet tarmac, his eyes scanning the horizon. The city of his childhood stretched out in the distance, its streets still asleep, its lights twinkling faintly like tired stars. He felt his chest tighten as memories began to push their way back into his mind. Dusty streets, lined with bicycles and rickshaws, the crackle of a street vendor's fire, the laughter of children playing cricket in narrow alleys. So many years had passed since he'd last walked those roads, and yet it all came back to him now, sharper than he expected. He didn't know exactly why he was here, only that the old woman's words had left him no choice. "Meet me where it all began," she had said. And now here he was, his heart pounding with questions, his mind heavy with unease. The ride from the airport to his old neighborhood was long and quiet, the streets slowly waking up as dawn painted the sky in faint orange and pink. As the car turned into the narrow lane where he had grown up, Sundar felt a strange chill to spike. The morning heat, everything seemed smaller than he remembered, the houses closer together, the road more cracked and worn, the trees older, their branches sagging. He stepped out of the car and stood still for a moment, just breathing. The ground beneath his feet felt familiar yet distant, like standing in a photograph from another life. He looked around, searching for her, and then he saw her. She was sitting on a wooden bench at the end of the street, her shawl wrapped tightly around her thin shoulders. She looked even older in the morning light, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes watching him with a strange, quiet intensity. Sundar's chest tightened as he began walking toward her, each step echoing loudly in the silence of the street. But before he could reach her, she stood slowly, turned, and began walking away. "Wait," he called, his voice cracking slightly. But she did not stop. He quickened his pace, his shoes scuffing the gusty ground. But just as he reached the bench, she had already disappeared into one of the side alleys. He stood there, confused and breathless, turning in circles, scanning the empty street. She was gone. A faint sound caught his attention, a door creaking open behind him. He turned and saw an old man standing in the doorway of a nearby house, his face lined with suspicion and curiosity. "You came back," the man said slowly, his voice hoarse with age. Sundar frowned. Do you know her?" he asked, his voice low, almost afraid to hear the answer. The old man just shook his head and gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. She's always been watching. Even when you left, she stayed. Some say she never sleeps. Some say she is the reason you became who you are. Before Sundar could respond, the man closed the door with a quiet thud. Leaving him alone in the street, he stood there for a while, staring at the spot where the woman had been sitting. The bench felt heavy with her absence, like the memory of something that had already slipped away. He didn't know what to do next, but something told him to keep walking. So he followed the narrow alley where she had disappeared, his feet crunching softly against the gravel. The alley twisted and turned, each corner revealing another quiet street, another sleeping house, another piece of his forgotten childhood. Memories came back to him in fragments, running barefoot through these same alleys. The smell of his mother's cooking wafting through open windows, the laughter of his friends echoing through the night. And with each memory came a deeper sense of unease. Like these streets had been hiding something from him all along. He turned another corner and froze. His childhood home stood before him, unchanged. The paint was faded, the windows dusty, but it was unmistakable. He walked up to the door slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. And then he saw it, an envelope taped carefully to the wooden door. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled it free. The envelope was the same as the one she had given him in the parking lot, yellowed, delicate, his name written neatly across the front. He tore it open and unfolded the paper inside dot this time. There was no letter, just a photograph. He stared at it for a long time, his breath caught in his throat. The photograph was old and grainy, showing a baby swaddled in a soft blanket. The baby's face was unmistakable. It was him. But standing beside the baby was a young woman. Her face turned partly toward the camera, her expression unreadable. And below the photo, written in that same delicate handwriting, were the words, "This is you." And this is what was hidden from you. Sundar felt his knees go weak. He sat down heavily on the step, staring at the photograph in his hands. His mind swirled with questions that had no answers. Who was the woman in the photo? What was hidden from him? He looked up, and his breath caught in his chest. There she was. The old woman stood at the end of the street, her shawl fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. But this time, she wasn't watching him calmly. She was crying. He stood quickly, stuffing the photo into his pocket, and called out to her. "Wait!" he shouted, his voice breaking. She turned and began walking away, faster this time. He ran after her, his feet pounding against the cracked pavement, his lungs burning. "Stop, please." But before he could reach her, a black car screeched around the corner, sliding to a stop between them. The door swung open and she disappeared inside before he could even see who else was in the car. He ran up just as the car sped away, the tires spitting dust into his face. He stopped in the middle of the street, breathless, watching as the car turned a corner and vanished from sight. The street was quiet again, the only sound his own ragged breathing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. His hands were shaking now, the paper crumpling in his grip. He stared at the woman's face in the photo, her features partly hidden in shadow. She was crying when she left. But why? And what had been hidden from him all these years? He stood there, alone in the silence of the street, feeling the weight of the questions pressing down on him and somewhere in the distance, faint but clear. He thought he heard her voice again, soft and broken. "You are running out of time." Asterisk the secret. Figure standing behind Sundar did not move. The street was quiet except for the faint rustling of leaves and the soft buzz of electricity. In the overhead wires, Sundar turned slowly, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might echo through the empty neighborhood. He blinked in disbelief when he finally saw who it was. It was Vijay, his childhood friend. Vijay, who had lived 2 doors down when they were boys. Vijay, who had disappeared without a word the summer Sundar left for college. They used to play cricket in this very street, their laughter bouncing off the walls of the houses. And now, all these years later, he stood there in the half-light, older, harder, his eyes full of something Sundar couldn't name. Why didn't smile. He didn't even look surprised to see Sundar. Instead, he stepped closer, his shoes crunching on the gravel. You shouldn't be here, he said softly. Sundar stared at him, his breath shallow. Where did she go? He demanded, though his voice trembled. Who is she? What does she want from me? Vijay shook his head, his lips pressing into a tight line. You're asking the wrong questions, he said. It's not what she wants from you. It's what she saved you from. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sundar felt his stomach turn. Vijay glanced around, his eyes darting to the shadows at the end of the street. Come with me, he said abruptly. We don't have much time, Sundar hesitated. He still didn't trust Vijay, but something in his old friend's voice, the urgency, the weight, told him he had no choice. So he followed. They walked in silence through the winding alleys, past darkened shops and sleeping dogs. The sun was rising now, casting long golden rays that made the dust sparkle in the air. Sundar felt like he was walking deeper into a maze, each turn pulling him farther from the life he thought he knew. Finally, they stopped in front of a small crumbling house at the edge of the neighborhood. Sundar remembered this place. It had once belonged to a librarian who had been kind to them as boys, letting them sit and read for hours when the heat outside was unbearable. Vijay pushed open the door, and they stepped into the cool darkness. Inside, the house smelled of old paper and wood. Sunlight streamed weakly through cracks in the shutters. In the center of the room was a table with a single envelope resting on it. Sundar stared at it, his chest tightening. She left this for you, Vijay said quietly. But she made me promise you'd read it here, only here. Sundar sat down at the table and picked up the envelope. His name was written on the front, as before. He tore it open, his fingers trembling, and unfolded the paper. The first line made his heart stop. You were never meant to know me, but you were always meant to owe me. He kept reading, the words blurring slightly as his eyes watered. Your parents could not protect you from everything. They tried, but they were too young, too afraid. I was the one who watched you from the shadows, making sure the past never touched you. They'd promised they would tell you the truth when the time was right, but the time never came. They were too ashamed. Sundar felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. What truth? What were they ashamed of? He turned the page and read on. You were born into something you were never meant to inherit. A name, a debt, a danger. They hid you to keep you alive. They cut you away from everything so you could have a chance at a different life. But the past has a way of finding what it's owed. And now it has found you. His hand shook as he lowered the letter. He stared at Vijay, his voice breaking. What is she talking about? What debt? What danger? Vijay sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. For the first time, Sundar noticed the deep lines in his friend's face, the exhaustion in his eyes. You really don't know, Vijay murmured. She never told you. Sundar shook his head, angry now. Told me what? Vijay looked down, silent for a long moment. Then he finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. She's your mother, Sundar. The words fell like stones in the quiet room. Sundar felt as though the air had been knocked out of him. He stared at Vijay, unable to speak. The letter slipped from his fingers and floated to the floor. Vijay met his eyes. She gave you up when you were a baby. Not because she didn't love you, but because she was protecting you. There were people, dangerous people, who wanted to destroy everything connected to her. She knew if she stayed in your life, you wouldn't survive. So she left. She stayed in the shadows. But she never stopped watching. Sundar sank into the chair, his mind spinning. His whole body felt numb. His mother. All these years he had believed she was just some stranger, some mysterious figure from the past. And now he didn't know what to feel. Anger, sorrow, confusion, all of it churned. Inside him like a storm. Vijay put a hand on his shoulder. There's more, he said quietly. She left you something. But she said you can't trust anyone else to find it. Only you. Sundar looked up, his voice hoarse. What? Vijay gestured toward the corner of the room. where a dusty rug covered a section of the wooden floor. "Under there," he said. "She said you'd know what to do." Sundar stood slowly, his legs unsteady, and walked to the corner. He knelt down and pulled the rug aside, revealing a section of loose floorboards. His hands shook as he pried them up one by one until he saw it, a small metal box nestled in the dark. He lifted it carefully. It was heavier than he expected, the metal cold against his skin. He carried it to the table and set it down. Vijay stood back, watching him. Suddenly, Sundar stared at the box for a long moment. His hands hovered over the latch, his breath coming in shallow bursts. Part of him wanted to open it right then and there. Another part of him was afraid of what he might find out finally. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to lift the latch. But before he could open it, the door to the house creaked behind him. He froze, his head snapping toward the sound. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the light outside. It was not the woman. It was a stranger, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes. His eyes glinted in the shadows. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, his voice like gravel. Sundar backed away from the table, instinctively. His hand still resting on the box. The man stepped closer, his gaze fixed on Sundar. "Give me the box," he said simply. Sundar swallowed hard. "Who are you?" he asked, though his voice was little more than a whisper. The man ignored the question and took another step forward. "The box," he repeated, his tone sharper now. "It doesn't belong to you. It never did." Vijay moved between them, his arms slightly outstretched as though to shield Sundar. "You don't want to do this here?" Vijay said. His voice tensed. But the man just smirked faintly and took another step forward. Sundar's mind raced. Who was this man? How did he know about the box? And what was inside that was so important? He looked down at the box, then back at the man. His heart pounded in his ears. And in that moment, Sundar knew he had a choice. Give the man the box. And walk away, or open it and uncover whatever secret it held. No matter the cost. He tightened his grip on the metal and stood a little straighter. But before he could decide what to do, the man lunged forward suddenly. And the room erupted into chaos. Asterisk. The boxness came so fast that Sundar thought he had fainted. His ears rang, his hands still clutched tightly around the metal box as his body hit the floor. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, as though the air itself had turned thick and impossible to push through. For a few moments there was nothing but muffled sounds. Scraping wood, a voice shouting somewhere far away, and then silence. When his eyes finally fluttered open, he found himself lying on his back in a narrow alley, the sky. Above him washed in pale gray morning light. His head throbbed, and his shirt was damp with sweat. He sat up slowly, every muscle aching, and looked around. The house was gone. The street was empty. The box, he panicked and looked down. But somehow it was still in his lap, cool and heavy, just as he had held it before everything went black. His breath came fast and shallow. He looked around wildly, expecting to see the stranger or Vijay, but there was no one. The only sound was the distant cry of a bird and the faint rumble of traffic far away. He forced himself to stand, his legs weak and unsteady, and stumbled toward the end of the alley. His mind was spinning with questions. Who was that man? How had he been overpowered so easily? And, most importantly, why had they left the box behind? As he reached the main street, he stopped and leaned against the wall to catch his breath. He opened his palm slowly, feeling the cold metal press into his skin. There it was, still locked, still sealed. But now it seemed heavier somehow, as if the events of the morning had infused it with even more weight than before. He knew he couldn't open it here, not in the open. So he began walking, one foot in front of the other, not really knowing where he was going, but feeling pulled forward by some invisible thread. The streets grew quieter as he walked farther from the city center. The air thicker, the buildings older and closer together. He passed a closed tea shop, its windows covered with dust, and paused in front of a small hotel. The sign above the door was crooked, the paint peeling, But the lobby light was still on. He stepped inside, the smell of damp wood and stale incense washing over him. The clerk barely looked up as Sundar slid a few bills across the counter and took the key to a room on the second floor. The room was small and dim, a single bed pressed against the wall, the air heavy with the faint scent of mildew. Sundar locked the door behind him, drew the thin curtain over the window, and sat on the edge of the bed with the box in his lap. His fingers hovered over the latch. He hesitated. He knew once he opened it, there would be no going back. Whatever was inside had already caused people to follow him, to threaten him, to knock him unconscious and leave him in an alley. And yet he couldn't stop now. He had to know. With a deep breath, he slid the latch open. The box creaked as the lid lifted, and inside lay a stack of letters, tied with a thin red ribbon, and an old leather-bound notebook. There were also several faded photographs, black and white edges curled, and a small brass key nestled at the bottom. Sundar picked up the first letter, his hands shaking slightly, and unfolded it. The handwriting was delicate but firm, the same he had seen before. "You are not who you think. You are," the letter began. "You are more than the name you carry. You were always more. But to protect you, I had to erase myself from your story. Now you must learn the truth." He set the letter aside and reached for the notebook. Its cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed. He opened it and began to read. The first entry was dated nearly 40 years ago. He was born at dawn. The room was quiet except for his cry. "I held him for only a moment before they came for me. They told me I had no choice. If I wanted him to live, I had to disappear." Sundar felt his throat tighten as he turned the pages. The entries continued, each one more heartbreaking than the last, describing how she had followed him from afar, watching as he grew up, paying for his school fees in secret, slipping money to his parents when they struggled, keeping him safe from people he never even knew were a threat. On one page, her writing wavered, as though her hand had been shaking when she wrote it. "They are still out there, waiting, watching. They know what he will become, and they want to stop him before he does. But I will not let them, not while I still breathe." He closed the notebook slowly, his chest heavy. All this time, she had been there, just out of sight, protecting him, sacrificing everything. And he had never known. He picked up one of the photographs next, a picture of him as a boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing in front of his school. And in the background, almost hidden in the crowd, was the faint outline of the old woman, her face partly obscured, her eyes fixed on him. He shuffled through the rest of the photos, and she was always there, in the market, at the park, even at his graduation, always in the background, watching. He set the photographs down, his hands trembling, and then his phone buzzed. He jumped, his heart pounding, and looked at the screen. Another message from the unknown number. "You shouldn't have opened it," the message read. His blood ran cold. Another buzz. "Now you've made your choice, and they are coming." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He ran to the window and peered through the curtain. Across the street, parked in the shadow of a tree, was the black car, the same one that had taken her away. Earlier. As he watched, the driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out, the same stranger from the library, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes like stone. He pocketed the notebook, the letters, the key, and the photographs, stuffing them into his bag, and grabbed the box. He knew he couldn't stay here. Just as he turned toward the door, a soft knock echoed through the room. His breath caught. Another knock, louder this time. "Mr. Pichai," came a voice, calm, cold, and unfamiliar. "We just want the box. Open the door and nobody gets hurt." He backed away slowly, his eyes darting around the room, searching for a way out. The window was small, but just big enough. He shoved it open, the wooden frame groaning, and climbed out onto the fire escape. He clutched the box to his chest as he descended into the narrow alley below, his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. He could hear footsteps pounding up the hotel stairs above him, voices shouting, doors slamming. They were already inside the room. He hit the ground and ran, his shoes slapping against the wet pavement, the box digging painfully into his ribs. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to keep moving. As he rounded a corner, he stopped abruptly. Standing at the far end of the alley, bathed in the faint glow of a flickering streetlight, was the old woman. She was waiting for him. Her shawl fluttered in the wind, her eyes glistening. She raised her hand slightly, as if beckoning him forward. He started toward her, his heart racing, but before he could take more than a few steps, a sharp sound cracked through the air, the deafening roar of an engine. The black car came roaring into the alley from the opposite end, its headlights blinding. The old woman's eyes widened as she mouthed a single word he couldn't hear but somehow understood. Run. And then the car surged forward, tires screeching, hurtling toward both of them. Asterisk the river. Sound of the crash still echoed in Sundar's ears as he scrambled backward, his hands scraping against the cold, wet pavement. Dust and smoke filled the narrow alley, and a sharp smell of gasoline stung his nose. His chest heaved as he tried to see through the haze, his eyes darting between the wrecked car and the figure of the old woman lying just a few feet away. For a moment, he could not move. His legs felt frozen, as though rooted to the ground by fear and disbelief. The black car had slammed into the stone wall with such force that the front was crumpled like paper. Its headlights shattered, its engine hissing and spitting smoke. He could see the driver slumped motionless over the wheel, blood streaking down the glass. And then his gaze fell on her. She was on her knees, her shawl torn, her thin shoulders rising and falling with shallow breaths. But she was alive, and when her eyes met his, he saw something fierce and urgent in them. Not pain, not fear, but determination. Asterisk, she raised her hand weakly, beckoning him forward. Sundar stumbled toward her, clutching the metal box tightly against his chest. Are you okay? He whispered, though his own voice shook. She shook her head and gripped his sleeve with surprising strength. No time, she rasped. They won't stop. You have to finish this. Go to the river at sunrise. Bring the box, or everything we've done, everything I gave up, will mean nothing. Her words sent a chill through him, deeper than the cool morning air. He looked at her, his lips parted, wanting to ask her 100 questions. But before he could speak, she tightened her grip and whispered again, her voice lower now. Trust no one. Not even him. Especially not him. And then she let go of his sleeve and slumped forward, her breathing shallow but steady. Behind him, he heard a faint groan from the wrecked car. The driver was stirring. Panic surged through him, and without another word, he turned and ran. The streets blurred around him as he sprinted through the alleys, the box pressing hard against his ribs with every step. He didn't know exactly where he was going, only that he had to get to the river before sunrise. By the time he reached the outskirts of the city, the sky was lightening, the first hints of gold creeping over the horizon. He followed a narrow dirt path that led down toward the water, his breath ragged, his heart hammering. The air was cooler here, heavy with mist, and the faint sound of rushing water as he descended. Finally, he reached the riverbank. The river stretched out before him, dark and wide, its surface shimmering faintly in the dawnlight. The mist hung low over the water, curling around the rocks and reeds. He stood there for a moment, clutching the box, his chest heaving, his mind racing. And then he saw her. She stood ankle deep in the water, her back to him, her shawl trailing in the current. The morning light caught her hair, and even from here he could see that she was trembling slightly. He stepped forward slowly, his feet sinking into the damp earth. I'm here, he called softly. I brought the box. She turned then, her face pale and wet with tears, her eyes glistening. She studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. You are late, she said, simply. Her voice was quiet but sharp, cutting through the mist, and now we may both lose everything. Sundar's stomach clenched. He took another step closer, the box heavy in his hands. I don't understand, he said, his voice cracking. Why didn't you tell me? Why all of this? She closed her eyes briefly, as though gathering her strength. When she opened them again, her gaze was steady. Because you wouldn't have listened, she said. Not until it was almost too late. Not until you had seen how easily everything can be taken away. She lifted her hand and pointed to the far side of the river, where the fog was thickest. There, she whispered. You'll find the rest of the truth there, but you have to cross. And you have to carry the box. No one else can do it for you. Sundar stared at the swirling water. The current looked strong, and the rocks beneath the surface glistened like teeth. He turned back to her. What happens if I don't? Her lips trembled, but she did not look away. Then everything you built, she said, everything you are, will fall, and I will have sacrificed everything for nothing. Her words hung in the air, heavy and cold. He swallowed hard and nodded dot, but just as he stepped toward the water, a sharp sound cracked through the silence, the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. He froze, his eyes darting to the riverbank. Behind him, the stranger from the library stood there now, half hidden in the mist, his dark clothes damp and clinging to his frame. He held a pistol casually in one hand, the other resting in his pocket. You really don't learn, do you? The man said, his voice calm but full of menace. You should have stayed out of this, but you just keep digging. Sundar tightened, his grip on the box, his breath coming fast. The man took a slow step forward, his shoes sinking into the mud. Hand it over, he said. You don't even know what you're holding, and you don't want to find out? The old woman turned her head slightly, her expression hardening. Don't listen to him, she said sharply. You're almost there. You've come too far to stop now. The man's mouth curled into a faint smile. She's lying to you, he said. She's always been lying to you. She's the reason your life has been built on secrets. You think you're holding the truth in that box? No, what's in there will destroy you. It will destroy everything you care about. Sundar's hands shook as he looked between them. The woman standing in the river, her eyes full of tears and fire, and the stranger on the bank, his pistol. Steady and his voice calm. She ruined everything, the man said softly. And now it's your turn to choose. Sundar's chest heaved as he stared down at the box. His reflection shimmered faintly in the water at his feet. His face pale and strained. You can walk away right now, the man continued. Drop the box, go back to your life. Pretend none of this ever happened. Nobody will blame you, and nobody will ever know. But then the old woman spoke again, her voice fierce and broken. If you walk away now, she said, you will never know who you truly are. And everything you think you've built will crumble before your eyes, because the past does not forget. The river rushed and roared around them, the mist swirling thicker, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds above. Sundar's heart pounded louder than the water, louder than the stranger's words, louder than his own fear. And then another sound, a faint splash from farther down the river. He glanced to the side, just in time to see a second figure emerging from the fog, another man, dressed in black, moving toward him quickly, his hands reaching for something at his belt. Sundar backed up instinctively, his feet sinking into the mud, the box still clutched to his chest. The old woman's voice rang out again, desperate now. Go, she cried. Go now before it's too late. But the stranger on the bank raised his pistol higher and took another step forward, his eyes locking on Sundar's. Your move, he said quietly. The choicest cold water bit into Sundar's legs as he stepped deeper into the river, the current pulling at him with invisible hands. Behind him, he could hear the stranger shouting something, but his words were drowned by the roar of the water and the pounding of his own heart. His shoes sank into the soft riverbed, the mud gripping his feet as if trying to hold him back. Yet he kept moving, clutching the metal box against his chest, his breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. He dared a glance over his shoulder. The first stranger still stood on the riverbank, his pistol raised, his eyes narrowing. The second figure was closer now, half hidden in the mist, his hands reaching towards Sundar as though he might lunge at any moment. And then he looked forward to her. She stood ankle deep in the river, waiting for him. Her shawl floated gently on the water's surface, her eyes fixed on his with an intensity that burned through the fog. She didn't speak, but her expression said everything. Come, trust me. Finish this. The river rose higher around his thighs. Now, and the current tugged at him more fiercely. One wrong step and he knew he could lose his footing. But still he pressed on. His fingers gripping the box so tightly his knuckles turned white. Behind him came another sharp sound. The crack of a gunshot. The water beside him erupted in a small splash as the bullet missed him by inches. Stop! The stranger barked. You have no idea what you're doing. But Sundar didn't stop. Each step felt heavier than the last, his legs burning, his body cold and trembling. The box in his hand seemed to grow heavier too, as though it somehow absorbed the weight of everything. The lies, the secrets, the choices made long before he was even old enough to understand them. When he was finally close enough to see her face clearly, she reached out her hands. He hesitated just for a moment, staring into her tear-streaked eyes. Why? He finally whispered, his voice barely audible over the rush of the river. She shook her head slowly, her lips trembling. Because the truth was never mine to keep, she said. It was always yours. And only you can decide what to do with it now. He stared down at the box, its metal slick with river water, the latch still holding it shut. Behind him, the stranger shouted again, but Sundar no longer heard him. All he could hear was the sound of the river and the faint, breaking tone of her voice as she whispered, if you open it, everything changes. If you don't, everything stays as it is. But you will always wonder who you really are. His breath caught in his throat. The stranger's voice came again, closer now, urgent and cold. Think about what you're risking. He closed his eyes, the weight of the choice settling deep in his chest. He thought of all the years he had worked, the things he had built, all the people who depended on him. And then he thought of the letters, the photographs, the quiet figure who had watched over him all his life from the shadows. When he opened his eyes again, they were full of something he hadn't felt in years. Clarity. His fingers moved too. The latch behind him. He heard the sound of rushing footsteps, the splash of water as the stranger charged toward him. But Sundar didn't turn. He pressed the latch and the box clicked open. Inside lay a single folded sheet of paper. He pulled it out, his hand shaking, and unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was familiar now, delicate but steady. The letter was short, only a few lines. You were born into a war you never asked for. You carry a name they wanted to erase, but you survived. Because of me, yes. But also because of you. This is the proof of who you are. Do with it what you must. But do not let fear decide for you. Beneath the words was a single name, one Sundar had never seen before, but somehow knew belonged to him. His true name got as he read it, something inside him shifted. The weight he had carried all his life, the quiet doubt, the unspoken questions, the feeling of never quite belonging, lifted just enough for him to feel it. Asterisk.